Bienvenidos. Welcome to part 2 of NFL Week 1, NFL Injury Report. Hey, you know what? It's here. And this is actually, we're talking about the wide receivers in this one. And this one's a little more complicated than, this isn't going to be the most complicated episode of the 3 that we're going to be producing in here. So I'm going to welcome in Dr. Edwin Porras. Edwin, ¿cómo estás?
Bien. We just talked about running backs, Jorge, and I'm ready to talk about some wide receivers. Like you said, this is going to be a little bit more in-depth, but we'll still try to make it quick and snappy.
Well, let's go to Green Bay to start off with. We got Christian Watson, and he's been dealing with this injury there at the end of training camp, and now all of a sudden it could be leaking into the season. What's his outlook? Because especially knowing full well that the Packers do have a fairly conservative athletic training staff.
So the Christian Watson's dealing with a hamstring strain. We don't know when the hamstring strain came on. It could have been last week. It could have been the beginning of this week. We don't really know. We know that he's already been ruled out for week 1. Additionally, wide receivers of his profile, so who averaged at least 10 PPR points per game since 2018, they tend to miss somewhere between 1 and 2 games. And it really depends on the situation, the player. There's a lot of context to be had. What we do know is that 21% of wide receivers in his profile missed 1 game, and then 17% missed 2 games. And then an additional 11% missed more than 2 games, which we don't really need to get into that because that doesn't seem like that's going to be the case for him, at least at this moment. So I would plan on being without Christian Watson for week 1, potentially without Christian Watson in week 2. Here's where I'm at with him. I drafted some of him. I got some Christian Watson because he's one of those guys that I just felt like, man, if I don't get any of him, he's going to be a guy I think that could burn me, right? I still think that passing attack, and there are a lot of questions in that offense, but I knew that his injury history, he was in the bottom of my yellow light tiers because of this hamstring situation. We don't really know how it was going to play out. But regardless, I went ahead and drafted him. I'm keeping him. I'm holding on to him because that upside is just so tantalizing. Like, you want a guy who can catch a 30-yard bomb, a 40-yard bomb. This is sort of the risk that comes attached with him. I'm holding pat for now. I'm not getting rid of him. I'm going to try to, weather the storm, work the waiver wire, or hopefully you drafted well enough that you can overcome this. But for now, just plan on being without Christian Watson for the next 2 weeks. But next week is a coin flip.
Considering the fact that he missed some time last year, could we start be creeping into like the concerns with injury history?
The hamstring is obviously already here, right? That's something that we're already dealing with. I'm not too worried yet. I tend to give guys, again, I haven't really given Christian Watson a chance, right? A lot of times you can, when you're younger, when the guys are younger, they can come back from these injuries, these hamstring injuries, and be okay. They can do fine. It's when you get into the Darren Waller, Keenan Allen type age groups, when you start to worry, you start to have concerns. So I just feel like, as a fantasy gamer, from a theory philosophy perspective, I need to give Christian Watson some time to show that he can do it or not. And we're still going to be ahead of the curve. I think fantasy managers worry about being behind. Like, there's nothing wrong on waiting on a player, accepting risk, and then moving on if you need to. You just not to do it too late. And I try to find that balance. I try to strike that balance. So I'll help you along the way. So for now, I would say hang on to Christian Watson for now.
No, and hopefully he gets better so that we won't have to be giving weekly updates on him. So, because really, it comes down to Romeo Doubs, who we don't have him on the list, but he's dealing with an injury and he seems to be on the questionable side. So it kind of comes down to, is it Jaden Reed? Is it Luke Musgrave? I mean, that's 2 rookies in a game. As I was talking to Matt Harmon about it, and he said, yeah, they're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball. So look for some Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones may lead the team in receiving. So this one, I'm going to have you try and talk me off a ledge as a Rams fan. Cooper Kupp. Seen the Minnesota specialist. You did the first car update, which I thought was fantastic, and thank you all the people who watched it and those who subscribed because of it. That hamstring, it's a pain.
Yeah. So what we have with Cooper Kupp is obviously we are yet to understand the severity. I do want to dispel some rumors that are going out there. There's some crazy rumors that he's getting tested for, different disorders that I don't really think are necessarily the case or bothering him. He's a 30-year-old. He's got a hamstring strain. That's really what it comes down to. Unfortunately, these guys just don't like that answer. The Rams medical staff is outstanding. I know of a couple of their staff members down there, and they're truly excellent. They do a really good job. They've turned over every stone. I also think it's kind of a little bit of a rant here, a little bit of a side note. Jorge, don't let me get too off track here, but it's always funny to me as a medical professional when I see other medical professionals on social media saying, oh, they should try this, or I wonder if they've looked at that. It's like, well, they've looked at that. I promise that they've looked at that. I promise your opinion is not needed. Thank you though. Very much appreciated. Anyway, moral of the story is, Cooper Kupp, he might be placed on IR. That's a possibility. Sean McVay said that is a quote definite possibility. If we're going to see that move happen, it'll happen. It's going to have to happen by Saturday afternoon. So if you don't hear that Cooper Kupp is on the IR by Saturday afternoon, then there's a chance he could be back by week 3, week 2, week 3, maybe. But of course, if he's on the IR, he's going to have to be out the first 4 weeks of the season. My contention is if you have enough, I don't want to call it depth, maybe upside, or if you have enough firepower on your team to withstand the next 4 weeks at least, I think that he's the upside move. He's the upside play for a person in your fantasy league who at this point might be willing to give him to you for a wide receiver too, just to get guaranteed production. I would be willing to do that depending on the situation and the circumstance. I'm an upside guy, and I believe in my ability to manage my roster well enough to get me across that bridge. I obviously understand that does come with risk, right? That doesn't mean that it's a slam dunk, but I do think that in situations like this, injury discounts can be applied. You just have to do it intelligently.
Yeah, and you know what? Especially if you drafted a deep wide receiver roster, you could if you could make that deal that you were talking about, yeah, I'd do that in a second. Gosh, you get that kind of upside, give it to me. Especially if you're going to, for the last 13 games of the season, if you come out of there, if you could still weather the storm 2-2, 3-1, vámonos. So one of the things, and I told you before the show a little bit, this Cooper Kupp injury, that having the setback, it reminded me of a game where Matt, in my Dodger days, in 2012, Matt Kemp, he pulled his hamstring, came back, he missed about 6 weeks, came back, and in that first game, and it's just, you're hitting that acceleration that you didn't hit in rehab because you didn't have to, but you hit that fifth gear, and then all of a sudden, that's when I saw him pull up around second going to third, and it was in Colorado of all places. So the altitude could not have helped, with maybe it helped, dehydrated him or something like that. But when it comes to a recurrence, that's the thing that worries me when it comes to the recurrence, that it could be something that it could be even longer just because of that, because he's hit that gear when he wasn't used to it. Could that be happening?
Yes and no. There's just a lot of things that go into it. Nothing replaces live game action. That's why in baseball, when we have guys come back from, as you know, we have them come back from injuries, they play in rehab games, rehab assignments. You throw them at a lower level. They play the game because even though it's at a lower level than they're accustomed to, it's still more game action that we could give them, in a live BP or something like that. So game action, there's no replacement for it. But again, it really just comes back down to he's 30 years old. He had a recurrence. It happens, right? It happens. And there's really not a lot you can do other than give it time, rehab it, and don't try to come back too quickly. So I am worried about them trying to bring him back too quickly because this injury does have a higher recurrence rate. And it might just be best for them to put him on IR and let him ride it out for the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's what's got me thinking that's going to be the smart thing. So we'll see. This is obviously going to be out before then, and so we'll see what happens. Number 3, Terry McLaurin. So you got McLaurin, who is dealing with that toe, who's returned to practice. We got the limited, as you've talked about. We've heard a lot of different options. It could be he plays this week or he doesn't play this week. It really comes down to it like that. Your prognosis on him?
So he has been a full participant in practice the last 2 days, which is a really good sign. And we know that this was probably somewhere in between a grade 1 and a grade 2. If you want to call it like a grade 1.5, maybe you can call it that. At least that's what it seems like. We know that if it were something like what Devontae Adams dealt with in 2019, he definitely wouldn't be playing right now. If it was something like what Treylon Burks dealt with, he probably wouldn't be playing right now. So we know that the severity was a little lower. Now, back to the game speed thing is, again, he hasn't had full game speed action to really prepare himself and to see what he looks like. So he could come off a little bit sluggish this week. He could there's a chance, right, that he has a recurrence. But overall, when you look at the data sample from 2018 of guys coming back from a toe injury, there's not a lot of good data. There's about 3 guys. And they're all over the board. They're like at 110% of previous production, 68%, 70%. Like it's really tough to know where these guys are going to land. But the bottom line is that if you drafted Terry McLaurin, he's probably one of your first, what would you say, George? I think he's somewhere in, it's like one of your first 6 picks, something like that, 6, 7 picks. So you probably have to start him unless you really are deep at wide receiver. And I think most players, most fantasy gamers in most leagues probably should throw him out there. Just don't expect a big game. And he's probably not a guy that I'm playing in DFS lineups, but I do think that he's still, based on his skill set, can provide you some sort of floor. So I wouldn't be extremely concerned.
And that's actually quite the disappointment because, gosh, they got the Arizona Cardinals. And it's such a sexy. Oh man, I mean Sam Howell, who looked so good in preseason games, and now it's almost like I'm defaulting to Jahan Dotson and maybe even throwing a few dollars at Curtis Samuel on my DFS lineups, looking at those guys. So we'll see. Last one, Jerry Jeudy, who also has the Denver Broncos have a nice one. You gave a great breakdown, even down to his running gait before, but to his injury, where does he stand?
Yeah, so Jerry Jeudy, I think there was a lot of panic, especially when Schefter came out and said, "Oh, I expect him to be out 6 to 8 weeks." Blah blah blah. Moral of the story: since 2018. Again, I'm citing this again from the Watson study, from the Kupp study. It's the same study that I conducted that's in the season-long playbook. Only 5% of wide receivers of their profile, of the 10 PPR points per game profile, only 5% of that sample since 2018 have missed 4 or more games. So 4 or more weeks. So the fact that Jerry Jeudy's already back at practice, not surprising. He's not going to dodge the 30 to 34% recurrence rate. So you do have to be careful with that. But Jerry Jeudy's looking to play in week 1. If he doesn't play in week 1, it's definitely week 2. Now, I will say if he's active this week, he's a guy that I might consider benching. Probably more concerned about him than I am Jerry Jeudy. Than I am Terry McLaurin, simply because of that, that recurrence rate. And the recurrence rate is the highest the first week back. So I would be cautious with Jerry Jeudy, but if he's out there and you need a flex, then you could probably throw him out there. I'm going to have to throw him out there in a league or two. So hopefully he's active. Hopefully he avoids a setback. So, but that's what we got on Jerry Jeudy. It was never a death sentence. It's just a reminder. When guys are carted off, when they're limping off, when they look like in pain, like, yes, of course they're in pain. But if we were paid to if orthopedic surgeons were paid to diagnose from afar, then they would diagnose from afar. That's why you have an exam. That's why you have MRIs. That's why you have eyes and feel, right? So don't create a diagnosis and a timeline based purely on what a guy looks like. I think that's what we learned here. And hopefully other people caught on to that lesson.
Yeah, especially especially in another great matchup. The Raiders are they're going to struggle against both the pass and the run. I mean, if Max Crosby isn't getting home, this is a good matchup. Maybe we'll see your former quarterback Russell Wilson take a step forward with the Denver Broncos. So
let Russ microwave. I think we'll meet somewhere in the middle. Let him microwave.
Oh my goodness.